Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's video I want to take a look at the differences between Battlefield 42 and the BF6 open beta since it's just finished after the 2 weekends that we had on the open beta. In this video specifically I want to take a look at some of the maps, the size changes between them and what EA and DICE have been saying about that, some changes between the classes, and general gameplay changes as well that are quite interesting. Some have stayed the same and some have changed from BF42, and the series in general we've seen some new changes, so let's get into that. So first things first, to kick off, we'll have a look at the maps. So we've got Brooklyn here on the screen right now, and Brooklyn is a good standpoint for the trend that Battlefield 6 is so far following, where all the maps are significantly smaller, and we're going back to sort of Battlefield 4 days where maps were much smaller, and it's obviously because instead of the 128 players we're back down to 64, so maps don't need to be that big, and they're a lot more urban. You can see through this footage Brooklyn is a very urban style map. It's a lot of buildings, a lot of vertical fighting. It really encourages those close quarters, and it's a very fun map to play on, although there aren't any vehicles on this map, which is quite surprising. So while it is a great map, it's definitely something different, and this is a trend for most of the maps that have been seen in the open beta, but I think it is important to acknowledge the fact that there have been a few articles from DICE and EA saying that they do not intend for this to be a consistent trend throughout the game. There are larger maps, it's just the beta has only had the smaller maps to encourage players to get straight into the combat. So to go on to another map that we've had, which is much bigger, is Liberation Peak, and you'll see it coming up on the screen now. This map, in my opinion, is a lot more fun. It is much bigger, still much smaller than most of the maps from Battlefield 42. But we've got air vehicles and land vehicles in this one. It's the only map in the beta that we've got access to air vehicles, so we couldn't get too much practice and trials of air vehicles in the beta, sadly. Although they feel very fun so far from what I have been able to play, but I've got no footage of that. So this map feels really fun to play. It's probably the only one where snipers are really viable. In Brooklyn I had a little bit of sniper gameplay, but none of it is amazing. And as you can see here, Assault was much more effective. Obviously, you're doing a lot more close quarters fighting, and with the kit that Assault has, it was a lot better. So looking at Assault specifically, they've got most of the same kit from 42 with a few small differences. Their signature stim pistol, or stim injection, has come back as their signature gadget. It's still quite useful. It doesn't feel as effective, but it still has that utility behind it. And you can see here I am running 2 grenade launchers. The only other option in the beta was to run a second primary weapon, which is something new to this game and something we didn't see in 42. So that's quite interesting. But we have the signature weapon system back, which is something familiar from 42. And we also have the ability for any class to use any weapon they want, which is something that wasn't as common in some of the older games, but has been a lot more common in the newer games in the series. So I'm quite glad we've got that back, and I think it's a great addition to BF6. It makes none of the classes feel too slogged down by any particular weapons that they're forced to use, although if they don't use their signatures, they will get punished for it, which I think is a much better way to do it. As you can see here, the grenade launchers that we were given in the beta are pretty effective most of the time. They're not too hard to get kills with, although it was a shame in the beta that we couldn't get more than 3 gadgets each, so I can't really talk too much about them. I've got some footage of the Siege of Cairo map here, the exit strategy version of the map, which is the Conquest one. I'm playing Engineer primarily for this footage as well, so I'll discuss that. I really wanted to give a quick visual of just me walking around the Cairo map. One, because you just get to get a really good look at how close quarters some of this map really is, and going back to that conversation about Brooklyn, that this game, Battlefield 6, is really wanting to move away from 42's very open spaces, at least in the beta, like I was saying earlier. From what we've been able to see so far, they really don't want a lot of these maps to be open. And if they are, looking back at Liberation Peak, they're very vertically challenged. We're seeing a lot more ridges and a lot more natural cover, which is encouraging players to run through natural trenches and get close up. This footage here is just showing some of the engineer class, which is one of my probably favourite classes in the beta, although it felt a little bit limited because of the free gadget cap they've put on, not including the signature gadget. The RPG is really fun. Alongside the RPG being really effective, the new motion mine that they've added for the engineer class, which I think is something similar to what we've seen in Battlefield 4 and some of the older games, is also really fun and really effective. They're both quite effective taking out tanks, although there was definitely a few games where if you've got a couple pocket engineers in the tank, they are very hard to take down. So I think seeing what other gadgets will be available to engineer after the beta will be very interesting. But vehicle combat feels a lot more tanky. It's a lot more about firing multiple rounds and having the team respond to a tank compared to someone in 42 being able to just like parachute off a Thunderhawk and blow a tank to bits with C4. Can't really one-man army a tank well without strategy or without relying on your team to give you a position to make a push from and flank the tanks, because something that has been a lot more prominent in Battlefield 6's beta so far is the weak points on tanks. Shooting a tank in the back or on the sides does significantly more damage depending on where you're hitting it, and that has become really important if you have a lack of engineers on the team or if people can't get to that area. So that's been something really interesting that we have seen in a way in some of the other Battlefield games, but I think it's really emphasised here. And tank on tank combat also has benefited from this. Everything feels a lot more strategic, there's a lot more thought to it and teamwork. Engineer feels like a lot more satisfying of a class as well. Vehicles are much more dangerous, especially when you've got someone who knows what they're doing using them. So I think that's really good so far in the open beta to see that. And it does feel a lot different from 42, where vehicles were helpful, but I didn't personally find that they were winning games unless you had someone really good on them or they were pivotal to a match of breakthrough. So it feels a lot more satisfying to take out tanks or to be a tank player who can get a lot done. So just coming towards the end of the class breakdowns, I know I haven't really mentioned medic or recon much, and some people watching may be interested in hearing a bit more about them, and I do appreciate that. But something about the beta, and I think Battlefield 6 in general, is I don't think we're going to see much new for these two classes. I think Medic was very fun to play, probably my second most played class in the beta. And honestly, that was partially because Medic hasn't changed that much. Aside from the very obvious drag system that's been added for revives, Medic really isn't that different, at least in my opinion. It's a culmination of everything from Battlefield 42 into one new class, nicely wrapped up, and the main real difference with the class is the signature weapon is now the LMG instead of the SMG, which really isn't that significant of a change. It makes the class more defensive if you want to use its signature perks correctly, but you don't really need to, and most of the time I'm just using a carbine or an SMG or something that I'm not getting any benefit using from the signature perks. The same can be said for Recon. There's not really much about Recon that's different. With Assault and Engineer, they are still relatively the same, but their roles in the game feel a little bit more altered, and the only real thing I can say about Recon is that most of the time you're not going to be shooting from the distances you'd be shooting in Battlefield 42 or even Battlefield 4, and once again, referring back to what EA and DICE have said about these maps being small in the beta, that could change, but for now there's really not much I can add, other than that Sniper and Recon as a class is not particularly as valuable in the beta, and I, as much as I've enjoyed them, and I've got some great footage, it is nothing significant to talk about. There is nothing really that's that new or that different. For that reason, I'm not really going to speak too much about them. To sum up the Iberian Offensive, overall this was a great map, and I think it does a great job at showing what you could destroy. There was a lot of destructibles in this map which really would change how objectives could be captured and played, and the overall essence of an attack and defense situation could be altered by an engineer or a vehicle damaging certain parts of the map, or even a recon using C4, and that could really alter the back and forth between two teams trying to push for the C objective, for example. Especially what was quite common if you played the beta, you've probably seen this, is people rolling up tanks on C and just blowing the building apart to give their teams really easy access on the attack and completely flip on the defender. That was really common, and while we've had that in a lot of other Battlefield games before, it wasn't something we've seen in 42, at least not from my 200 so hours on it. It wasn't something that you would really see at all throughout most matches, at least not to a significant extent. But in Battlefield 6, it's that sort of dynamic damage is back. It feels important, it feels effective, and it does seem to be changing certain teams' performances. Obviously, if you can get a really good breach on a building and that can give your team some vital access to a location, it can really change around your abilities to take over that objective and hold it. And it definitely felt like it was making a difference in matches. And once again, going back to the importance of vehicles and how vital they can be, it feels like they, once again, a bit like some of the older Battlefields, are making a bigger difference, which I think is really fun, and it's really bringing in that sense of teamwork and everyone having to work together between infantry and tanking and aircrafts as well, which was something you could see on Liberation, but not as much. It's bringing in a much more varied dynamic of gameplay where, once again, infantry have, in a sense, I suppose you could say infantry have been nerfed almost. But what I mean by that is really, it's just infantry have had some of their specialist abilities from the hero system of 42 taken away, and it's given tanks and vehicles a lot more importance because that sense of one-man army is no longer there, and I think that is generally good for the series. And while it was fun in 42, it wasn't what Battlefield is, and while I enjoy it, and I'm not going to say it was bad, it is nice to have a bit more of a classic format back for the series, and I think we've all wanted it, and I think that's why the beta was so successful addition to the series. I hope everyone else is with it too. I've not got much more to say. I didn't want this to be an insanely long video. It was more just an excuse me to test out some new equipment, talk about the beta. I'll hopefully have another video coming along soon, which will be a bit differently edited. I think it's going to be more like my usual content. So if you're one of my friends who's watching, thank you very much for listening to me waffle. I appreciate any feedback, mic volume, recording issues. If the editing feels a bit sloppy, please let me know. This is all essentially just a bit of a test and seeing if this format of video would work or if the scripting needs issues, and it may not feel like it, but yeah, I have done some scripting for this. So please let me know if something's not feeling right. I don't really think I've got anything else to comment. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you later.